Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And have I got a great company doing great things remotely today for you? Today on the line, I've got Rebecca Corliss from Boston. Rebecca, you're the VP of Marketing at Owl Labs, which is the creator of Meeting Owl, which people are raving about. Really, I have not heard one bad thing about Meeting Owl, so I'm super excited to talk to you. But let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Oh, perfect. So I am a true blue hybrid worker. So my world, if I'm at home and working from home, I have a great little home office that is part working, part music station. I'm actually a musician, so I have a keyboard. I actually even have a singing group that rehearses in it, so it has a nice little dual purpose. And my other office is our corporate office in Boston. And so I would say good 75 to 85% of the time I'm actually at the office among my coworkers, and I use my home office as my opportunity to really get my hacking focus time. So that's how I blend the two.
Okay, so home office is like deep dive, focusing in on things, and then the office space is for, interacting with people and all the other things that you need to do. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It's the world I prefer, and I found where I flourish best. So it's been really interesting to learn about myself in this new world that we're creating as well. So I've learned I'm an office worker type, which is really interesting.
I hear that actually from a lot of people, that they don't really like being at home all the time alone. So what was the journey like? We're gonna dive right into a tangent really quick. But what was the journey like in terms of finding out that you liked the office more than necessarily being at home all the time?
Oh, I have a great story. So it was after I started at Owl Labs, and I unfortunately had to have a small surgery, not a big deal, on my foot. So I was stationary for a bit. So that was really the only side effect. And I actually worked from home for about 3 weeks. And I had never worked from home full time for an extended period of time like that. And frankly, Lizette, I suffocated. I completely suffocated. I like to tease myself a little bit. I am the quintessential extrovert. And what that means is I absolutely get my energy from others. That's where I get my creative energy. That's what I love. And so I found when I was in isolation, even like through every video meeting I possibly could get, it actually was very hard for me. And so that was a great lesson for me in saying that this world of remote work, virtual work, and hybrid teams, I believe it's all about being wherever you can be most successful. And in that specific instance, I learned it is among others in person where I am most successful. So that was my journey.
Yeah, I can understand. My husband had the same thing. He tried working from home and hated it, absolutely hated it, and he finally rented an office with friends just to be around other people every day and to have the rhythm. So yeah, it is all about working where you're most productive or most successful. I like that phrase even better, because maybe productive is not what you need to be. So how about the other people at Owl Labs? Is it flexible? You can work where you want, or how does it work there?
That's exactly right. And so we're really interesting. I would say we're about 33%, 33%, 33%. 1/3 are folks like me who prefer to be in the office and are there the majority of the time. Then we have another third, which I would say are a good 50-50. It totally depends on the day, the person's mood, what they're working on. I like to give my colleague Sophia, who runs content on our team, I like to use her as that example. If she's cranking, she's at home. Or if she just needs space to be with her cat, she's at home. And that's great. And other times she's at the office. So she's at 50-50. And then we have another third that's fully remote all the time. My teammate Erin lives in St. Louis in the United States, and she's remote at all times. And so it's been really interesting to have this beautiful blend, this hybrid team that we work with every day. And it's been a very cool experience.
So given that you have this blend though, how do you guys stay aligned on what you're working on, and do you have any sort of like team agreements in place, or how do you standardize that?
Yeah, I would say nothing extremely formal. And so I think number one, it's over communication and communicating as much as we can, and not relying on some of the more traditional ways of communicating. Like, for example, I may be in the office if I create a world in which those sitting around me get more information than those that are working from home, that's bad. I'm doing it wrong in that case. So it's things that I'll do depending on the nature of whatever's going on. Do I save it for a meeting setting when I know we'll all be together? Do I post a little heads up on Slack? Do I write something up in Google Docs? Do other teammates do that? So it's always making sure that as best as possible when there's news hot off the presses, if you will, or project updates, that it's in a format that's accessible to everyone at the same time. That's the key piece there.
And how many people are working at Owl Labs now?
Yeah, we're under 50 employees today. We're growing quickly. It's
50 or 15?
50, right?
Wow.
Under. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So then how do you let people, that's quite a lot actually in terms. So you're saying over communicate, think about the kind of conversation that you're going to have, but with 50 people, does everybody do that?
Oh, well, probably within the nature of their own groups, as I would love to be in every engineering conversation, but that's not practical.
Right.
And so I would say we do that within any sub-team. So that happens within our leadership group. We have a great meeting. We do rely on meetings quite a bit. We have a great meeting across all of our business organizations that we do at least every other week. And that's been really great to get high-level updates from everybody. I've also found that often the office workers will act as representatives for those that are remote. So I might hear something ad hoc and say, oh, I got to tell Erin that. And so that also, I think, supports everyone being extremely mindful. Mindfulness is number one in making this type of environment work.
That's a great quote. Mindfulness is number one. Okay, pay attention, listeners. That's it. Okay, so let's get into the Meeting Owl, because I think this is one of those tools that is taking the market by storm. It seems like it. Everybody's talking about it, and people that are in my workshops and in the presentations really tell me they're really raving about it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on the phone with you. Like, I'm especially excited to talk to you because of it. So tell us, what is Meeting Owl? What problem does it solve?
Oh, great. Well, first, I'm honored. You just delighted me. I'm so pleased to hear that it's helping so many great organizations. So the best way to explain Meeting Owl is to first paint a picture of that terrible hybrid meeting that unfortunately all have been a part of, where you may be remote yourself and you're meeting with a group of people who are all sitting at the table together. That is easily the place where there's the most inequality across the participants. And the other fact is that these meetings happen all the time and they're not going away. Actually, 40% of companies are hybrid right now, and it's likely growing. So anyway, it's really a problem that needs to be solved. So anyway, long story short, the Meeting Owl is a 360 camera mic speaker device that goes in the center of the conference room table. So that's the first difference, going in the center. And what it does is use audio and video cues to actually automatically focus on different people when they talk, and actually can do a bit of a split screen. And so you can imagine now the experience. First, you see a panorama, a 360 panorama of the whole room. So you can see everything that the people in the room can see. And then you can see much clearer views of the people speaking. And so you don't have that, I like to call it the fly in the wall perspective that a lot of cameras give. That really is, it excludes you. It makes you feel like you're there to observe versus interact. And so the Meeting Owl is all about changing the game so you feel as close to being in the room as possible.
And how does it help the people that are in the room?
Yeah, great question. So from that standpoint, it's darn easy to use. I would say in order to make in order to make video conferencing as accessible as possible, it needs to be a simple solution that you can just use. You don't even have to think about it. I would say really the biggest benefit are those that are in the room. I mean, your camera is for those who aren't in the room, not for you. And so if it's easy to use and then you get a better discussion as a full group because of this, that's when everyone really benefits. And that's really what we want to solve.
So I noticed in a lot of companies that I go to, I walk into their conference rooms and I see the old spider phone in the middle of the conference room table. And they're like, oh, we're having these terrible meetings and I don't know why. Why are people still in so much pain over these hybrid meetings? Is it just that they don't know that these tools are available, or they don't know how much pain they're in? I mean, I'm sure you see this all the time.
Yeah, I hope I don't upset anyone by saying this. I don't know why anyone would do anything audio only these days. I don't know why. Actually, research that's not ours, but other research shows that 55% of communication actually comes from your facial expressions and the visual cues and things like that. So literally doing something audio only just keeps you from so much info. And so that I would say, I can remember actually before coming to Owl Labs, I worked for a wonderful company called HubSpot. And that organization even had its own journey in exploring remote work. And I remember only 5 years ago, every meeting was audio only. And I would think of the few remote workers we had, and it was like the last 5 minutes of the meeting was reserved for her questions because she just had to wait. That's terrible. That's terrible.
That is terrible.
So anyway, I mean, HubSpot has come a long way. So credit and kudos to them. And I would say, anyway, long and the short of it, I don't know why you would do a meeting audio only. And I would say even those that are progressing toward video, you really need to think about the psychological effects of your camera positioning. I mean, I hope I'm not getting too sciencey, but it's really interesting. The perspective you're giving your remote participants will completely change the nature of the interaction, which I think is the next level where we really want to contribute.
Now, I think let's get into the weeds on this because that's really important. So can you give an example of maybe like a bad one and then like how the meeting owls would help that?
Yeah, actually, I can talk. I'm going to talk a little bit to our CTO and co-founder, Mark Schmidts' experience. So prior to founding Owl Labs, he was actually a remote worker himself. And he worked remotely for a startup. He was based in Boston. The startup was on the West Coast. He was his first time working remotely. And he was very pleased that being a remote worker was great. 90% of the time, it was those hybrid team meetings that were really painful. And in his experience, they were using a laptop. That their startup makes sense. Why wouldn't you start with a laptop? Nothing wrong with that. And just for some context, he was the senior leader looking to support those that are actually at home base at HQ. And constantly he was trying to figure out the moments that he might strategically interrupt the conversation in order to support them, decide if there was a moment he wanted to actually ask a question because he missed something. Like, is it better to interrupt the flow or get the info? So no matter what, it was this constant mind game he was playing with himself to figure out how to interact. And that's terrible given his job was literally to strategically guide this group. And so long story short, brilliant individual on the team at HQ actually put the laptop on a swivel stool and just started swiveling it to whoever was talking like a cameraman. Very smart. And that was Mark's aha moment, thinking, wait a second, I'm a roboticist. I can build this. And
that's handy.
Right? Great.
Yeah, I wish I was a roboticist or a programmer. Yeah.
So it was that. And that I think is experience that a lot of people have had. And I think even if you're there to maybe not be as active participant, but you still want to be present, even just the perspective of being of a camera above the TV, below the TV, you're literally there to watch them. And that creates an environment where maybe you want to tune out, maybe you don't feel as involved or it's not as important to you. And in a world in which more and more people are working remotely, we need to solve that. Otherwise, the remote folks are always going to be at a disadvantage. And that's a big problem.
Right. Because a lot of times, people are always telling me like, oh, you're always arguing that remote is better than co-located. And I think, no, that's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing we should have the choice. And what happens when people have to work remotely, which is probably the majority of the situation. People don't want to, but yet we're forced into these situations because, well, there's only so many, insert job description X in Boston. And then after that, you have to go find people elsewhere. Some people don't want to move or what do you do when you have these situations? So yeah, the hybrid scenario is sort of the reality of it. And I think things like Meeting Owl are definitely bringing us closer. So what are then your tips for some hybrid meetings? So one, of course, using the Meeting Owl, but how do you make it more inclusive? I bet there's some more facilitation things that you guys are doing.
That's a great question. I'll say my mindfulness again. I think it's always important. If there's a meeting facilitator, he or she should always think equally about those in the room and those outside of the room. Have the folks outside of the room not participated in a while? Why is that? Maybe they have nothing to share, or maybe they feel like there hasn't been a moment. Just being really mindful is number one. Part of that mindfulness, this is funny, I have gotten really good at noticing visual cues of remote folks when they want to talk or they're about to.
It's handy when you have video, right? Because you can see the like, they're taking a breath because they want, or they're raising their hand also, like back in school.
Yep, absolutely. And so there have been some instances, and I've called people out for incorrectly too. I would say, oh, Erin, did you have something to say? And she's like, oh no, I was just
brushing my hair. Yeah. Stretching.
But sometimes it's like, oh, thank you. And that's helpful. So that's mindfulness. And then I would say, I mean, it sounds really self-serving to say, I hope you have a 360 camera. I don't mean to be self-serving, but we have seen benefits of that improved experience really, really impacting the nature of the conversation. So really think about the technology that you have and the experience it's creating. I would say start every meeting on time. You know what else is terrible? Joining a meeting and no one's there. It's so cruel. And you're just sitting there thinking, was it this link? Am I in the right
double checking everything, like
Yeah.
time zone, link, right.
Mm-hmm. So always start promptly is really important. Think about the visuals that you're using. Are you presenting? Are you writing on the whiteboard? Can you make those equally as accessible to everybody? Make sure they can see the same information. That's really important. And I've also found, I mean, this is good for any meeting. If you can send an agenda and discussions beforehand, this is really good because then everyone's in the know about what's to be discussed and feels prepared. And that's just good for people's working style, regardless if you're remote or not. And so I found it is especially important in this type of environment and something we try to do.
Do you think it's more important for the prep work in terms of these hybrid meetings than it is for if you're just having a meeting and everybody's in person?
It's hard to say it's more important. I would say it's essential anywhere, but in the very least, I can see an instance if you're remote and maybe you're learning how to include yourself and it's a new style for you. If you feel even more prepared, you're at least removing that barrier to entry, if you will. So that's what I would say to that. But no matter what, I think that's a best practice for any meeting.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, people who come unprepared, it's like, why are we there? Plus, there's so much in online meetings. I always say that you should use a combination of asynchronous and synchronous communication. So while you're together in the meeting, that's one form, but there's all the prep work and the follow-up, and that could be done. I mean, that's all done remotely, and you could get really creative in how that happens. So, visuals and prep and yeah. So, yes. Indeed. You guys must have great meetings at Meeting Owl.
We work very hard. I like to say we drink our own champagne, if you will. We are
so much better than dog food. I really love that phrase.
I much prefer champagne. A mentor of mine gave me that phrase once, and I would say we don't have it 100%. We don't, and we never will, and that's not bad because that inspires us to think about what might we want to create for this world in the future, and that's A-okay. And so we do our darndest. We're mindful. We try. And so I would say that's the environment we need to create and cultivate ourselves as a company culture in order to innovate in this space.
So with the Meeting Owl, then, what are sort of the minimum requirements? What kind of rooms are they good for?
Great question.
Okay.
Yeah, right now the best space for the Meeting Owl is I would call a small to mid-sized room where you can be within 6-ish feet, 6 to 8 feet or somewhat that. There are plenty of customers who go even further. That's cool. I'm excited to hear about it, but we want to make sure you have a setup that's a great experience. You mentioned what the benefit for folks in the room. The setup's really easy. I like to explain it as the smartest darn webcam you've ever used. And so it's USB to your computer, whether it be an in-room computer or your laptop, and then you can use it with whatever video conferencing software you prefer. We found that people often use many, and so it's good to be universally compatible in that case. And then you select the Meeting Owl as your mic, your speaker, and your video, and you're good to go. And so really bringing that sophisticated experience, but with extremely simple setup is very, very important to us because we believe in a world in which this can become a standard for every conversation. And so if that's the case, how do we make sure it's extremely easy to use? And so that's the other part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many conference rooms have you gone into where you have to call the IT department in order to get the meeting room started even? I mean, it's getting better over time, but that was sure my life for a long time in the corporate world was you just had to call somebody from IT because the equipment was so hard to use. Yeah. So yeah, it sounds so Meeting Owl literally is just plug and play. You plug the USB into the computer. It works with all different kinds of video conferencing systems. And there's really nothing to do. It auto adjusts to the people who are speaking in the room.
Yeah, because going back to Mark's great story, that individual who swiveled the camera with great intention, that's great. But at the end of the day, you need to focus on your discussion, not your technology. So we want the meeting owl to be making those decisions of what is the most important things that you should focus on right now based off of who's talking, et cetera. And so we want that experience to happen automatically so you can just do what you need to do, which is talk.
Right, right. Like the tech, don't let the tech get in the way. Like you're there for the conversation. So it sounds really good, but what is it at Owl Labs that you guys struggle with this hybrid form of working? Because it really is the most difficult. If everybody's remote, that's one thing. If everybody's in person, that's another thing. Everybody has their own challenges, but this hybrid style of working always trips people up. What is it that you guys find difficult?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say are still, I love the compliment you gave about our meetings. Our meetings are still not perfect. They don't always run on time. We try our very best, but we still suffer from that. I would say we move really, really fast. And so just always reminding yourself, who else needs to know that is not in the room right now? Who do we need to share this with? And I think we do really well, but that's always something that you need to improve. I would say, I also love speaking about career growth and support. We found that visibility is really important for career growth. And then you think, well, how is one visible when you're not physically there? And I would say that it's a little bit different in that case. How can you be present within the conversations that are happening on Slack? We happen to use Slack, or the conversations that are happening on video calls, or what you're contributing, or things like that. So you have to change how you think about visibility. I think we do relatively well, but that's a good skill that I think people are learning at this moment.
So how to be more visible, how to work out loud so that colleagues know what you're doing, and that you don't get forgotten when raises come around and reviews come around.
Of course.
How does feedback then work at Owl Labs? How do you guys give each other feedback? Is there like an annual performance review or monthly sessions? What does that look like?
Yeah, we do. I would say we do formal things annually, and feedback is just a regular occurrence, especially on my team. I meet with everyone on my team every single week, which is a mix of getting things done as well as the how you doing and feedback or whatever it may be, depending on what's going on. But I believe in those active conversations, and that happens consistently no matter where someone is working. I would say that's a key piece. It hasn't been much of an issue. Oh, another thing, I'll give an example actually, triggered in my mind. I believe in feedback is best when it's in the moment. So a mistake would be, this remote worker needs some feedback. I'll wait till the next meeting that we have a video call. No way. There's no reason why you couldn't just say, hey, can we just hop on a call really quick? And I'll share this now. Why would I keep that great feedback from you just because you're not here? I would say we're pretty strong at that, but that's not always the first instinct that someone might have, especially at other companies. And so I would say as long as you use the same best practices in the moment, frequently, nothing's a surprise, and do have a formal process because that's important, and everyone gets that opportunity, you're in good shape.
Yeah, indeed. So instantly, a lot of people have this mindset of when I'm working at home, I'm away from the office, I'm away from my colleagues, because that was sort of the 1980s style of telecommuting in some ways. You know, it's like you have a work at home day and you were just out of communication. Everybody knew because that was supposed to be the deep dive day. But now it's more like no matter where you are, you have to be in constant communication with the team, or not constant, but regular communication, I would say.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, it seems like the culture in that is changing a bit. Okay, so let's see. You said that you use Slack for talking, of course, Meeting Owl for your meetings. What are some of the other tools that you guys use?
We use Zoom frequently. That's the primary video conferencing software. We happen to use, other tools. We use the whole Google suite. We live in Google Docs. We live in shared PowerPoint, shared slides, Google Slides, I would say. Dated myself a little bit there. And that's really important. We use them both for presenting as well as planning. I actually love using Google Slides for planning. It's really interesting. Reporting, things of that variety. I would say, what other tools? Those are our primary tools. We've tried lots of productivity tools. We've tried Airtable, we've tried Trello, and sometimes we found that changes based off of teammate style and interest. It's more important about, it's not what tools you use, it's your intention of using them. And so that's been really interesting evolution for us as a group as well.
And is that so? Is everybody allowed to choose their own set of tools? I mean, it sounds, you need Slack, of course, for everybody. But in terms of like workflow in different groups, like one team could choose Trello if they wanted, another could use Airtable, whatever they wanted. It's fine.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely the case. I wonder, just for sake of being really realistic, how that will scale as our own company grows. I think that's something that is fine at a group of sub 50. That might be something we want to reflect on long term. I'll actually give a shout out to my former company, HubSpot. HubSpot had an extremely successful wiki, and that wiki was a centralized communication tool that worked across hybrid teams, offices as it grew, et cetera. That's not something that Owl Labs has today. We use Google Docs as our main tool in that case, but that would be interesting to see how it changes.
It's true, because as you scale, you have different requirements, of course, and when you're trying to align people. So it's a good reminder, actually, depending on the team size, what people are doing on that. Okay, and what about hiring? I don't know if you're involved with hiring colleagues, but I'm really curious because not everybody can work with this style, right? Hybrid. I mean, it sounds like you can be in the office, you can be fully remote, you can be 50-50. Is that weird for people who are coming on the team, or is it getting more normal?
I think for us especially, it's getting more normal. We've hired, and I've hired in every category.
Okay.
I've hired folks without ever meeting them in person, which is then always so delightful when you finally get to.
Like, oh, you're so much taller than I expected. Yeah.
That has happened. And so we've done that actually a handful of times. There's really no reason to do that. Otherwise, I would say sometimes for really impactful leadership roles, we've flown people out if they're going to be remote and live somewhere else. We've done that. That's been a great tool to do a mix, but usually the first handful of conversations were remote. So that's worked well. And sometimes if they happen to be local, we've done everything actually not even then. We'll probably do the first phone call or two remotely, and then in person from there. And so it's really been a mix, and it hasn't been an issue for us. I will say, if the person is going to be remote the majority of the time, I like to have a really thoughtful conversation about their style and where they're most successful, and make sure they're not making a sacrifice that could put them at a disadvantage on a personal style level. So that's always really, really important. And then I talk to where they get their energy from, how do they visualize them working remotely? Have they done it in the past? What were the pain points, et cetera? We're hiring a wonderful new designer who will be based in LA, so diagonal across the country, if you will. And we had wonderful conversations about her style, and I think she's going to be very successful. But that's an example where it would be crucial that the person feels supported and enabled in that environment, because you want to make sure you can do your best work. Number one, that's the most important thing.
And do you find that there are some people that can't do this, or will they find out what the style is and they're like, no, that's totally not for me? Does that ever happen?
It has happened for me personally.
Oh.
I actually, before I joined Owl Labs and I was figuring out my next move, I was in a very final conversations with a company. I won't share them because I didn't go there, so I don't think that's fair. That would have been a fully remote position, and some self-reflection. I thought, you know what? This is an amazing company. I really respect. I don't think this is for me, and it's a bummer, but I think it's more important for both of us that I be realistic in this moment, because I want to make sure wherever I am, I'm as most impactful as I can and should be. So
Yeah.
that was important.
And could you go back to being 100% in the office?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I haven't been asked that. Could I go?
I mean, given you're somebody that loves, like for people like me, if people ask me like, oh, would you go back to the office? It's like, hell no, not unless I absolutely had to. But for people like you that really get their energy, and extroverts that get their energy from being around people, I wonder, like, once you've had the taste of having the choice of being remote or not, like, could you go back?
That's really fun. You've caught me off guard. I think I could, for the right opportunity, the right world. But then I also wonder, I say that's so not natural to today's world.
Yeah, the freedom is nice.
Yeah. And so I guess, yes, I could. And I'm almost lucky. I am lucky that my style allows for that, because I know a handful of people who couldn't take that moment of reflection and they wouldn't say yes. It would be a much bigger sacrifice. It's hardly a sacrifice for me because it's my preference. And so I guess I would say, yes, I could. And I feel fortunate that my style allows for that, because I know just too many people where they would be at a much bigger disadvantage than I would be, because it would be thwarting them from doing their best work depending on what they had going on, their preference, their needs, their project in the moment.
Right. And in terms of people then, I'm curious about the Boston area, because every region there are different sort of views, and remote working is at a different level in different places in the world. So in the Boston area, we won't even go as far as like the US, but in the Boston area, is it becoming more and more common? Is it sort of a normal thing for most people that you interact with? You know, are there lots of co-working spaces set up? What is the scene there in Boston?
Yeah, there's plenty of co-working spaces, lots. That's always great. I would say Boston, to give an example, it's quite a bit of a tech hub. And so we're lucky to have a lot of talent here, especially for technology companies. Again, I want to emphasize lucky. It's likely a function of a lot of the universities in the area, I would say. And so there hasn't been as strong of a push for hiring outside of that geographic area. There hasn't been as strong of a need, but that's fortunate for our area. I would say what is growing is the interest in flexibility and the interest in offering flexibility in order to be competitive when hiring. That is growing quite a bit. I mean, we have like Boston's best places to work. Flexibility is a key element of that. People are thinking about how they can offer that on their team, so they're a really interesting place to hire. So things like that, I would say, is a big theme. So less of the fully remote, I think that's still transitioning, but a lot of the flexibility among the office workers.
Okay. Oh man, we're running out of time, but I have so many questions still. But I'm still really curious. So there's a whole bunch of conference room equipment companies out there. We've got the Polycoms, and you've got the Microsofts and the Ciscos out there that are and so the Meeting Owl seems like such a simple, relatively low cost solution compared to these super fancy conference room equipments. So what would you say to offices? You know, they're decked out in these. I mean, if somebody has a telepresence room, that's a different story. That's like another level, of course, where you're really bringing people in. But compared to these expensive systems, what would you say to people like that? Like, scrap the system, buy a Meeting Owl, and...
Oh man, if you have one of those fancy telepresence systems, good for you. And please invite me over so I can see it. I mean, by all means, if you can afford that, awesome. That is very, very cool. The fact of the matter is many businesses cannot.
Yeah.
And the really important thing is video conferencing and strong video meetings should not be rare. They should be a commodity. They should be in every conversation. And so even in that world where you have that amazing company that has a telepresence system, I would say you should make sure you have something in every single room, because there's going to be a point, we're probably going to hit it any time now, when there's going to be someone remote in every single one of your meetings. And so if that's the case, how do you make sure that you're giving the best possible experience in every single meeting, in every single room? And so it's always accessible. This needs to be fully accessible in order for this trend to progress, and in order to make sure you have that equality, or the best equality you can, across your office workers and your remote workers. That's what's necessary. So I would say, to those who haven't had one in every room, well, I don't want to be self-serving, but I'll just give you a little wink and a hope. So if that's something that's helpful for you, by all means, I'd be honored for you to check out the Meeting Owl. And if you happen to have a setup and you've gotten feedback that either it's difficult to use, or even those who are joining remotely aren't feeling included, well, that's another trigger for you to consider if it's the right solution, because I think there was a time when that was fine, but now when we rely on this so much, it's just a different expectation.
Well, and it's not even necessary anymore. It used to be necessary that we dealt with all these painful online meetings, and now the technology has just gotten so good and so smooth that there's no reason to suffer, I think. Does everybody at Meeting Owl use video? Is it standard?
Yes, I would say the only instances I don't use video are when I'm doing a little productivity hack and I'm on a phone while I'm like marching down the street or
right?
something like that.
It happens. It happens.
Or in the car or something like that where it's not safe. I would say every conversation is video. There have been times I've even worked with, whether it be an agency or an outside partner or something like that, and they'll send a bridge phone line, and I'll say, I'll make a little joke and say, I don't know how to have audio only conversations anymore. I will likely interrupt you constantly, and I don't want to do that. So here's a link, can we use this instead? So that's usually the joke that we share, because why? And it's worked great. There have been a few organizations I've worked with which I've met in person after, and they thought, oh my goodness, I feel like I know you already. I don't feel that way with my other clients. And I'll say, yeah, it's because you've seen my face.
Yeah, you can build relationship. I've worked with a woman for over 7 years now doing just virtual co-working together. She's one of my closest friends, and I've never met her in person.
Wow.
So you can build relationships online. It takes a little longer, of course. I mean, maybe not, but you're not there in person. You're not sharing nachos together. It's a different story, but it is possible to build these relationships online. So yeah, I'm curious because there are a lot of people who don't like turning the video on. And I'm like you, I think, come on, you're missing out on so much. But would you hire people if they said, hey, I'd love to do this, but I won't turn my video on? I don't know if that's even a question you ask, but.
Oh goodness. I would say, because we haven't come across that first in any of those conversations. In general, what I would say is you don't go to a meeting with a paper bag on your head. So
right?
I understand the nature of being camera shy. That is an experience that people have. However, here's the tough love. You're being selfish in that moment. You're being selfish because you're not making it easy for the person you're talking to connect with you because you're self-conscious. And that's not fair. And so I get it. I understand. Just brush your hair and brush your teeth and you're good to go. I have joined meetings from video in all sorts of state of readiness. And I would say to not put on your video is selfish, and you should think about that.
And it's so easy. Just put on a shirt. Keep your pajama bottoms on. Keep your slippers on. Or just put on a shirt or a scarf if you've got your pajama top on. You can accessorize just about anything. Yeah, and turn the video on.
Of course.
Love it. Okay, so last question, 2 questions still. Advice for people who are just starting out with working remotely or with hybrid meetings. Let's put it sort of on these. What advice would you give for people who are just starting out?
For those who are just starting out with working remotely, I would experiment with putting on music, not having music on, working in blocks of time, going for walks, just experiment with a lot of ways to break up your day. What you don't want to do is just be glued to your computer and then feel stuck. So I would say experiment with that either day to day and get your own groove. You might find that you're more like my style and you like being around people. And so maybe turns out that half your day is at a co-working space or a coffee shop. So I would say experiment and find your groove. That would be my tip for remote workers. And give feedback to your team. Turns out I love being interrupted. So don't worry. And if you need a quick hello, that's a-okay. And you can call me on a video call or something like that. So I would say communicate with your team on how to support you best too. So that's my tip there. And then for hybrid meetings, one, I would say acknowledge it's the most painful meeting style. It's a fact and it's okay. That's why we acknowledge it so we can improve it. 2, the best you can do for those in the room, and it's really those in the room's responsibility, be mindful. Think about the equality of the participation. Think about the experience you're offering, because really the remote folks or the group of people you're talking to or the other office, whoever it is really reliant on you in the room to create that strong experience. So be thoughtful for it. And I would say from there, if you're able to do that consistently, it will become a habit. And that's the good part. And then I would say, question your technology. We're lucky to be a really innovative society, and think about whether it's creating an experience for those you're talking to that enables them or thwarts them from being able to be at their best.
Oh, that's some great advice. I'll include all of that in the show notes. So I love mindfulness is number 1, and question your tech and find your own groove, because it is true. I mean, I would have had no idea that I liked working alone until you start doing it, and then thinking like, oh yeah, this is actually really good for me. So great advice. And now we've gone way over because I always find people interesting, but you have especially good things to say today, so I really appreciate it. Very last question though is the best way to, people want to find out more, what's the best way to get in touch with you and to find Meeting Owl?
Sure. So in terms of the Meeting Owl, you can Google us, and our company is called Owl Labs. So that's our company, Owl Labs, the creators of the Meeting Owl. If you'd like to connect with me, Rebecca, I love Twitter. Twitter's my favorite. I am Repcor on Twitter, REPCOR. So if you have really interesting articles that you've seen or anything like that, I always love checking those out. But it's really fun to connect with folks there.
And I saw on your LinkedIn, just as one more thing, you're a serial acapreneur. That
Yes,
was pretty
I am.
cool. So can you want to explain what that is? I think that, because that also explains your Twitter handle, I think.
Yes, that's fun. So, so I mentioned at the beginning of the interview that my home office is also a musical space. And so the joke is that I have actually started 2 different a cappella groups from scratch in my life, and both have been quite successful. And I sing with one today called the A-Tracks. And so
Great name.
it's a little play on my love of startups and technology, but also my love of a cappella. So I'm an acapreneur, and in a cappella you always have puns, so it's perfect.
Oh, that's even better. Yeah, who knew? Who knew? Super cool. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I hope everybody runs out and buys a Meeting Owl. They're super cute as well as being very effective. They look like a little owl on your table. So you can spice up your meeting room just by having one there. And thank you again for your time.
Perfect. It was great.
All right, everybody. Until next time, be powerful.